So for those of you that was expecting me to do a news of the week video, because today is Wednesday and I usually do a news of the week video on a Wednesday, that video is now going to be delayed till tomorrow because I am going to do the preview, which I was supposed to do yesterday, but I decided to delay it to Wednesday because of personal reason. And no, that personal reason isn't because I am affected by the ongoing wildfire that's pretty much burning the whole state alive. And by the way, if you are one of those people that is affected by the wildfire, I hope you stay safe out there because it's definitely getting ugly in terms of the wildfire that is spreading around the states. And hence, that's why when I woke up this morning, it was still dark, even though it was around 11 a.m. that I woke up, and that when I look outside, the sky basically turned a bright orange because of all those smoke and wildfire that is basically reflected to the sky being bright orange. But that being said, let us get back into the preview, which tonight we're going to have 5 games that is going to be taking place, and there's going to be one game that's going to be taking place tomorrow. And that game, there is definitely a lot of speculation of whether if that one is going to be played. And it's not because of the fact that there's going to be another boycott that's going on with the players in this league because of the Black Lives Matter and also the killing of Jacob Blake, but it's because of air quality issue. Believe it or not, despite the fact that I know a lot of people that living in my area are panicking the fact that there's an orange bright sky, the air quality is actually not that bad. And in fact, I checked the air quality just a couple of minutes ago, and I actually saw Seattle has worse air quality than we have right now, and their sky is basically blue as it gets. So there's definitely a question mark of whether if this game between the Seattle Sounders and the San Jose Earthquakes is going to be played because of whether or not if the air quality is going to be good enough that this game is actually going to be taking place. But that being said, this week is also a week where we have 2 games that is being made up because of the aforementioned the players decide to boycott because of the killing of Jacob Blake and also the Black Lives Matter movement going on just a couple of weeks before. And the first game that is going to be make up out of this midweek game is Miami versus Atlanta United. And this was actually the game that basically kicked off the rest of the game being canceled and the rest of the game now being postponed to another date. And there's going to be 3 more games that I think it's going to be make up heading into next midweek. But this is the first one that is being make up. As coming into this game, Inter Miami currently have a record of 1-2-6, which unfortunately is the worst record in the league. While Atlanta currently coming into this game with a record of 3-2-4. This game kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and let's hope it actually does kick off at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific, and that we don't have to wait like 2 hours like what happened in the last Miami game, where because of thunderstorm and lightning, the game didn't kick off until around 10 o'clock local time. Now, Miami and Atlanta, they of course faced each other once already. That was last week down in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and it was a 0-0 draw between both of those teams. Although it wasn't because of lack of trying, it was because both teams just could not finish. And, both of these teams, the story of this season is that they just don't have anybody going for that is able to score a goals. And it's reflected in terms of the top goal scored, where there's only 3 players for Miami that have actually registered a goal, with Pizarro currently have 3 goals, although you could say he could have clearly had more after some of the bad miss that he had in the last game against Nashville SC. Carranza currently with 2 goals, and Agudelo with 1 goal, his name as Miami has only scored 6 goals so far this season. While for Atlanta, Pity Martinez, who is now no longer with Atlanta United, as it was made official yesterday that Atlanta United has sold him to Saudi Arabia, will finish his season total with 2 goals, alongside with Barco, another player that is threatening to potentially be the next to depart Atlanta United and head to Europe, currently with 2 goals. Emerson Hyman also with 2 goals, with Adam John, who scored the equalizer in the last game against Orlando City with 1 goal apiece, and Brooks Lennon also with 1 goal. Now, I know many people will say, well, this is going to be another 0-0 draw, isn't it? Well, it could be, but don't be surprised if this game will have goals. And that I think when you look at both of these teams and how much they have struggled in terms of goal scoring. For one team, I think they're struggling in terms of goal scoring isn't because of lack of trying in the last couple of games. It's just because they just don't have the clinical finishing. Like in the last game against Nashville, Miami, if they were just being at least a little bit more clinical in terms of their finishing, they would have at least scored one goal in that game, and they probably could have scored a couple more if they were definitely being very clinical in front of goal. Whereas for Atlanta, they also had some chances in the past couple of games, but yeah, it's been a struggle in terms of finding a player that can fill in the shoes of Joseph Martinez, and that now knowing the fact that there's a couple of players that is departing and that they are really embracing the transitional year that this club I thought that was going to go through after the fire of Frank de Boer. This could be a long year for Atlanta United, and I hope the fans are not just going to quickly abandon this team just because the fact that this is a transitional year and that the aches and pains. Welcome to the club, Atlanta United. This is what every MLS club is going to have to feel for. But either way, in terms of my prediction, and I actually didn't put a prediction box in this preview or on this board because I just didn't have enough room to do it. But my prediction is that I think it's going to be a draw between both of these teams. But I expect there's going to be at least one goal score in this game, and that I don't think this is going to be another 0-0 draw between both of these teams. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Minnesota versus FC Dallas. So the Loons got a much needed win in the last game against RSL as they were able to win 4-0 against them and improve their record to 4-2-3. While FC Dallas currently have 2 wins, 4 draw, and 1 losses. This game also is going to be kicking off at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. In fact, there's going to be 3 games tonight that's going to be kicking off around the same time, and there's also another 2 that's going to be kicking off about an hour and a half after the 8 p.m. kickoff, which means that unfortunately there's going to be a time tonight where there's going to be 5 games that's going to be taking place at the same time, and that one of these games I'm unfortunately won't be able to catch fully because most of the time I can only watch like 4 games at once before I just have a really tough time in terms of keeping track in each of these games. But for this game, Minnesota, of course, as I mentioned, they won 4-0 to RSL. And this one I'm definitely keeping an eye on because this is one of my team, and I want to definitely keep a close eye on in this game against FC Dallas. While Dallas, of course, drew 1-1 against SKC away. Although Dallas have not played in a week, and that I think the advantage for them in this game is not just because of the rest that they had, but for the Loons, I know that they won 4-0 against RSL, but I also will say that, like what I did in the review, where that was a very weak RSL team, and in many ways you could say it was kind of like a Real Monarchs kind of team. Well, actually, I won't go that much of a disrespect in terms of RSL, but I'll say it was kind of like an RSL B team. Now they're going to be facing a Dallas team that's going to be much rested compared to a Minnesota team that they're still going to be a little bit tired with the way that they play a lot of games in these past couple of days and in these last 2 weeks or so. Now, in terms of the top goal scored for Minnesota, Kevin Molino and Robin Lod currently tied with 3 goals apiece. I mean, despite the fact that there's a lot of haters about Robin Lod, he's on the top score sheet right now for the Loons, time with Kevin Molino. Ethan Finley currently with 2 goals, although he is going to be out for 2 weeks with his injury. The same can say about Almeria, who currently have 2 goals, and I think it's just for the best that Almeria is going to be sit out for these next couple of games because of injuries, because you can clearly see that, for the past couple of games of how much he has struggled in terms of going forward. I just have a feeling it might have been something that is kind of bother him, whether it's if his knees that he's kind of bothering with the injury. And remember, all the way back from the MLS's back tournament and back in the first game where he, of course, injured his knee, I wonder, was he kind of rushed when we decided to bring him back in the very next game and for the remaining of the tournament, and that he was kind of playing hurt. And, the last thing I want a team to play, especially the team that I support, that I want to see is our team just rush a guy that we clearly don't need to do so, and that it could have further repercussion with the way that we decided to rush him. So it's good that fact that Amari is going to be sit down for a couple weeks, and hopefully this time the Loons doesn't rush him back so that he's not going to be back to his best form that he had in the first two games. Well, Aikopara, another guy that is injured, and still we have no idea when exactly he's going to be back with this team, currently with 2 goals. Speaking of injury report, Ozzy Alonso is another guy that is going to be out for 2 weeks. So yeah, the injury bugs is definitely bitten Minnesota in these past couple of games, and that this is where I get nervous. The fact that we are depleted for these next couple of games, and since these games come fast and furious, does that mean that we're going to go through that struggle that we had coming back from the MLS's back tournament again, and that this is going to be the beginning of another winless run that we're going to go into. Now, for Dallas, the Cobra currently is at the top of the list in terms of goal scoring with 2 goals. Pepe currently has 1 goal alongside with Jesus Ferreira, Paxton Palmico, and also Fafa Pico with 1 goal apiece. And FC Dallas is another team that tends to struggle in terms of scoring goals. Although, if the last match against Minnesota, you wouldn't guess that was the case when they were able to win 3-1 in this game. And I'm really hoping this is a game where they just don't shoot themselves in the foot again. I mean, I know this game is a home game, which means that does give me a little bit more confidence because the Loons tends to do very well at home. The problem is we're very depleted in terms of our squad, and that I really hope we just don't do what we did the last time we faced Dallas, which is get ourselves in a big hole, and that we had to dig ourselves out of it, and it turns out we never dug ourselves out of that 2-0 hole that we found ourselves in for the first 15 minutes of the game. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the rematch of the Canadian Classic, and I think this is going to be the third and potentially final Canadian Classic of this season. Well, that depends on what's going to be happening in Phase 2 of the MLS schedule, which I'm expecting Phase 2, potentially they're going to release the schedule soon. I mean, we're getting to a point where we're almost at the end of Phase 1 of this MLS regular season, and that I'm assuming in these next couple of days they are going to release the schedule of Phase 2. I mean, the only way that I think they might decide not to release Phase 2 is because of the fact that they might think the coronavirus is started to once again affect the league, which that is clearly not true, because I haven't heard any cases of positive. Well, I've been hearing only one cases where it was a unconfirmed kind of positive cases that it turns out later they confirmed that test result was wrong, and that specific player got a negative test. That is the news that I've heard. Any players that's getting tested positive for the coronavirus, so that I'm assuming we're gonna eventually get Phase 2 of the schedule, and I think maybe the reason why it's taking a little bit longer to do it is because they're still trying to figure out what the Canadian team is going to do, and that I'm assuming in Phase 2 we're not going to see the Canadian team face off against each other all the time, because I know in some way it's kind of a little bit unfair, the fact that the Canadian team are kind of faced against each other, and especially I think Toronto has been a big benefactor in terms of this, because of the fact that they have been pretty much by far the best Canadian team out of those two teams, although in the last 2 games that hasn't really been the case. I mean, TFC in the last 2 games, they have lost against their Canadian compatriot. First, they lost to Montreal last week 1-0, which snapped their fluky 18-game unbeaten run that almost broke the record for the longest unbeaten run in the regular season in MLS. But then they, of course, took what many people thought that it was a shock loss, but I thought it was kind of expected, a 3-2 loss to Vancouver, and that they're now coming into this game with back-to-back loss after that fluky unbeaten run. While Montreal, as I mentioned last week in the Canadian Classic, they were able to win 1-0 against Toronto to basically broke that unbeaten run. Now, in terms of the top goal scorer, Sofia Taidir, Maxi Urruti, and Romel Kyoto all tied with 3 goals, followed by Lassi Lapinainen and Rudy Camacho with 1 goal apiece. For TFC, Ayo Akinola currently leads the chart with 5 goals. And, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the top goals scored. These goals tally does carry over in terms of the MLS is back tournament, as I, of course, look at each team website in terms of getting the stats, and it looked like the goals total that they, of course, put on their stat sheet is carry over in the MLS's back tournament. And if I decide not to do that, then it could get very, very difficult to do it. So that's why I decided to just include the goal tally of these players that score those goals in the MLS's back tournament. Hence, that's why Ayo Akinola is currently top of the sheet with 5 goals, despite the fact that he hasn't scored a single goal ever since he has scored those 5 goals in the MLS's back tournament. Although a lot of that reason why he hasn't scored any of those goals is because he only played 1 game ever since the MLS's back tournament, and that he's been kind of dealing with some injuries ever since the tournament is over. Now, followed by that, you got Pozuelo and Richie Larrea currently with 3 goals, Pablo Piatti with 2 goals, and Jonathan Osorio with 1 goal apiece. And, in this game, I'm going to say this could potentially be a game where Montreal could once again do something similar to what they did against Toronto last week, which is they're going to upset them again. I mean, clearly you can see Toronto, ever since they've gone through that unbeaten run, are really struggling, and I think the struggling part for these last 2 games has to do with the fact that their defense has been god awful, especially in that last game against Vancouver, and also going forward in terms of goal scoring. They haven't been as bad as going forward on the attack. There's been times where they have looked like an attack that can really cut open any defense and able to score goals. But the problem is they haven't been able to score goals. And in other words, their attack is very, very lackluster in terms of finishing. And that is going to be something that I think Toronto's got to fix if they're going to win games, and that they need to improve in terms of the finishing. Like, if you want to talk about expected goals, which, by the way, I usually never want to mention expected goals and never want to kind of use that as a stats, even though I know the league website and those so-called experts around the league have also talked about the expected goals. The reason why I just don't want to talk about it is that it's really just a stupid kind of stats in terms of the way that, yes, you're expected to score 4 goals in this game, which is good, but the problem is that's not the total goal score number, and that expected goals is just kind of like a prediction of how many goals you're supposed to score, not that this should have been the amount that you, of course, score. Either way, I just think it's just a ridiculous kind of stats, and I usually don't talk about it. But, if I was going to talk about the expected goal for TFC, it probably is very high in these last couple of games with the amount of missed chances that they had in this game. But again, I'm not going to be surprised if Montreal can pull it off again. But for Toronto, they got to figure it out, because with these 2 losses in a row, they have now slipped down to 3rd place in the Eastern Conference. And if they don't get out of this funk, they can quickly drop themselves for what people thought, well, I wouldn't say people, but what the MLS expert thought that they were the best team in the league, to now being a team that is dropping down the Eastern Conference and could potentially, well, I wouldn't say they could potentially fall out below the red line, because they're still a long way from being below the red line, but they could get closer to that line if they do not decide to pick up the slack and start winning again this season. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Colorado and Houston. Now, I know the league basically said yesterday that this could potentially be a game where we're going to see another snow classico. Now, to everyone's biggest disappointment, that unfortunately is most likely not going to happen, because I did check the weather before and it looks like it's not going to be snowing during this game. But if you want to see a snow classico in MLS, well, then why not just check out last year between the Rapids and the Portland Timbers, as that game was truly a snow classico, and truly probably, in my opinion, the best snow game that I've ever seen out of all those snow games that has happened in MLS history. But this game, it is still going to be a cold one between the Rapids and Houston. The Rapids currently have a record of 2-3-3, while Houston have a 3-4-2 record. This game kicks off at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And by the way, this is also a matchup where one team is definitely on the sky high right now, and the other team is just ice cold right now. And unfortunately, that team that is ice cold right now is the Colorado Rapids, who currently have the longest winless run in the league with 6 games, and that Houston have won the hottest run right now in the league with winning 3 games in a row and scoring 10 goals during that spell, while only conceding 3 goals in terms of that. Now, in terms of the top goal scored for both of these teams, Colorado, currently Kai Kamara and Jonathan Lewis tie with 3 goals, followed by Bassett, Namili, and Drew Moore currently with 1 goal. For the Houston Dynamo, you got Darwin Quintero and Albert Valise currently tied at top with 4 goals, followed by Memo Rodriguez, Ariel Lassiter, and Mauro Manotes with 2 goals apiece. And judging by the fact that both of these teams are kind of heading into opposite direction, and that if you want to see previous form of how each of these teams are done, then I'm going to say the Dynamo is going to have the advantage heading into this game. However, I will say this with the Dynamo, even though I know they already have a big road win against Sporting KC, which is something that they rarely have done in the past couple of seasons, I won't be surprised if Colorado is going to maybe pull off getting a point or even getting a victory over Tat Ramos' team, because I'm pretty sure Robin Fraser is getting desperate in terms of getting this team right, and that eventually the Rapids got to snap out of this winless run that they are on. Because if they don't snap out of this, they're going to have to once again do what they did last year, which is just go on a crazy run in the second half of the season. And knowing the fact that this season, it's a shortened season, yeah, you're not going to have even more time to try to make up for that, and that they got to eventually figure this out before it just gets too late, where even if they make a miraculous run heading into the second half of the season, they're not going to make the playoffs. And especially how competitive the Western Conference is right now, you better get your acts together before you are going to be really falling behind the standings, and that there's really no way back in terms of the way to trying to overcome a very big hole that the Rapids have dig themselves in the early part of the season. Well, for the Dynamo, again, they are just rising up the table, and if Tat Ramos continued to get this team attacked like this, it won't take long before they are going to be not only above the red line, but also, well, actually, I think they're now above the red line right now, but it won't be long before they are going to be joining in terms of the top half and maybe the top 4 of the Western Conference, mainly because of how exciting this Dynamo team has looked in the past couple of games. But moving on, in terms of the next match, it is going to be the second game that is make up after it was postponed back on last Wednesday between RSL and LAFC. Now, RSL currently coming into this game with a 2-5-2 record. LAFC, their record is pretty much dead even at 3 wins, 3 draw, and 3 losses apiece. This game kicks off at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. RSL, of course, lost 4-0 to Minnesota away, although I'm going to put that as an asterisk because, again, Freddy Juarez, he basically started out a pretty weak team in that game, and I think he kind of saw this game knowing the fact that he's got to rest some of his guys so that he can, of course, put them into this game to face against an LAFC team that, although this season they have struggled a little bit immensely, and that you would expect eventually they're going to get going, is still a very good LAFC team. But as I said, they of course lost 3-0 against the Galaxy, and I think they're currently 7th in the Western Conference right now, which if you would have told me in the beginning of the season that LAFC would just be above the red line right now into, I think, week number 8 of the regular season, yeah, a lot of people would be laughing at me, but that's where we are right now, as LAFC is really struggling in terms of their these early season, and I think the 3 losses that they have this season, that I think is almost equal to the amount of losses that they had in the entire season. I think they only lost 4 games last season, and now they have already got to 3 in terms of them playing 9 games this season. Now, the top goal scorer for both of these teams, you got Damar Krylak currently with 4 goals, followed by Corey Barrett with 2 goals. Michael Chen, Justin Miram, and Albert Rusnak all tied with 1 goal apiece. For LAFC, Diego Rossi currently has 9 goals, but a lot of that was from the MLS's back tournament where he won the Golden Boot. BWP currently with 4 goals, with Carlos Vela, who's going to be out for a couple of more weeks, currently with 2 goals. Brian Rodriguez and Mark Anthony Kay, who is going to be suspended in this game because of that red card in El Tráfico, have 1 goal apiece coming into this game. But yeah, this should be a very interesting kind of match, and I won't be surprised if RSL could be able to pull off a bit of an upset in this game, because again, that 4-0 loss against Minnesota, they didn't really play their strongest squad, and that knowing the fact that their strongest squad so far this season have looked like a team that has a lot of determination of not losing a game, I think this would be a game where RSL could potentially continue the misery that it is this season for LAFC, and that I won't be surprised if they are going to be able to get a victory over LAFC in this game. But finally, moving on into the last game of this week, is the Seattle Sounders versus the San Jose Earthquakes. This game, of course, is going to be the only Thursday game that's going to be taking place at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Seattle currently have a 4-3-2 record, whilst the Quakes currently have a 2-3-3 record. And as I mentioned earlier in this preview, this is a game that could potentially be postponed because of the air quality that is going on in Seattle. But if this game does take place, well, as I said, this game is going to be taking place at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Seattle, of course, lost 2-1 against Portland in the Cascadia Derby, while the Quakes, their struggle in terms of them coming back from the MLS's back tournament continue as they drew 1-1 to a very lowly Colorado Rapids team. Top goals scored for both of these teams. For the Seattle Sounders, you got Jordan Morris and Raul Ruiz-Diaz tied with 5 goals apiece. Then you got Nico Ladero and Kelvin Leardon with 2 goals, and then Bowana currently with 1 goal to his name in fifth of the top goal scored chart. For the Quakes, you got Wando currently with 3 goals. Then you got Alanis Vaco and Andy Rios with 2 goals, followed by Espinoza, who has really been a big disappointment in these last couple of game with the way that he's been performed, only has 1 goal to his name. Now, it's easy to say that Seattle probably is going to win this one, and I wouldn't disagree with that statement with the way that the Quakes have just looked really bad in terms of these last couple of games, and that the confidence level has to be very low with this team. However, one thing I will say is that the Quakes, whenever they play against Seattle, they always tend to play against them very tough, and that Seattle does at times have trouble to face against this Quakes team. I mean, last year when the Quakes play against Seattle on the road, they had a 2-0 lead against the Sounders, and that if they didn't just implode it in a span of 1 minute, they could have got a huge 3-point against the Seattle Sounders, and you could have think that 3 points or that 2 points that we dropped could have maybe propelled us to make the playoffs at the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, as much as I know the easy choice in terms of predicting this game is that the Sounders is going to win, I won't be surprised if the Quakes are going to get at least a draw in this game, and they need to get at least a draw or even pull off a surprising win in terms of this game, because right now they're bottom of the Western Conference right now, and you know, this is supposed to be the season where things are supposed to get better than what it was last season. Not that last season was really the peak where we saw with the Quakes, and that this season they have just crumbled and kind of look like the classic Quakes team from the past couple of years, which is just basement dwellers in the Western Conference. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the preview of this video. I know this has been a relatively long longer video than usual because I kind of went a little bit more detail in terms of talk about these games. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these 6 games? And as always, let me know in the comments below your prediction for all of these 6 games. If you wonder how am I going to do the review for these 6 games, well, I'm now going to split into 2 parts, mainly because I think it's kind of pointless doing the review later tonight where I look at 5 of these games that is going to be played and then just look at do another review video where I only have to look at 1 game that's going to be happening. So instead, I'm just going to do the review of all 6 of these games after the game between the Seattle Sounders and the San Jose Earthquakes is going to finish. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I, of course, will see you guys next time.